Hello and welcome to History Sleep Stories. You arrive without hurry, leaving the noise of the present behind as though it were a distant shore slowly fading from view. Nothing demands your attention here. There is no urgency, no argument waiting to be resolved, no verdict to be reached. Instead, you are invited into a story that unfolds at the speed of centuries, where time is not counted in moments, but in quiet continuity. This history does not rush toward you. It waits, patient and composed, as it always has. As you settle in to listen to this sleep story, a like and a subscription are a quiet way to support this channel. And if you feel comfortable, you're warmly invited to share where you're listening from in the comments. When many people think of the Vatican, they imagine conflict, secrecy, or power asserted through drama. Those images are loud, sharp, and restless. They belong to another kind of storytelling. What you are entering now is something different. This is a human story shaped by routine, belief, memory, and the slow layering of tradition. It is a history built less by sudden events than by steady presence, returning again and again to the same ground, the same rituals, the same questions asked softly over time. As you settle into this journey, it helps to release the expectation that history must always be tense or decisive. Much of what truly lasts is formed quietly. Stones are placed one upon another. Words are copied by hand, patiently, under steady light. Decisions are made not to conquer, but to preserve. In this space, influence grows not by force, but by endurance, by the simple act of remaining when other powers pass away. You are not being asked to judge what you hear, or to defend any position. There is nothing to solve. This story does not demand belief, only attention, and even that attention can be gentle. You may listen as closely or as loosely as you wish. The path forward is wide and forgiving, designed to be followed slowly, or simply drifted along, as the mind begins to rest. What makes this history worth entering is not spectacle, but continuity. Few places on earth have been shaped so carefully by time, layer after layer, generation after generation, with such an awareness of what came before. Here, memory is treated as something fragile and valuable, something to be carried forward rather than consumed. The past is not sealed away. It breathes quietly beneath the present, shaping it without announcing itself. As you move deeper into this narrative, you may notice how often silence plays a role. Silence in corridors, silence in study, silence in moments of reflection. This is not emptiness, but space. Space to think, to remember, to allow meaning to emerge slowly. In such spaces, leadership often takes a quieter form, guided less by command than by example, by continuity rather than disruption. There is comfort in knowing that not every powerful story must be loud to matter. Some endure precisely because they avoid spectacle. This is one of those stories. It has survived not by insisting on attention, but by waiting for it. And now, without pressure or demand, it has opened its doors to you. As this gentle history begins, you are safe to let go of the day behind you. Nothing here will ask you to hurry. Nothing will rise suddenly to disturb the calm. You are simply walking forward, step by unhurried step, into a place where time moves differently, and where the past rests quietly, ready to be remembered. Remain here a little longer, allowing this calm beginning to settle fully. The story has only just opened, and there is no need to anticipate what follows. For now, it is enough to arrive, to breathe, and to rest within the unfolding quietly together. Before there was a city of walls and guarded entrances, before names gathered weight and meaning, this place was simply a hill rising gently beside a river. You can imagine it now, not as a destination, but as part of a wider landscape, breathing easily beneath an open sky. The ground slopes without drama, neither steep nor commanding, and that quiet modesty defines it from the beginning. Nothing here insists on importance. It waits, content to exist. In ancient Rome, this hill lay just beyond the pulse of the city's busiest heart. From here, the sounds of life arrived softened by distance. Voices drifted rather than echoed. The clatter of carts faded before it reached the higher ground. What remained was a steadier rhythm, shaped by wind through grass, by footsteps that passed without lingering, by the slow movement of light across stone and soil. The air carried the mixed scents of earth and water. Nearby, the Tiber flowed steadily, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires. Its presence cooled the mornings and softened the evenings, creating a sense of continuity that did not depend on human plans. Even then, time moved differently here. Days unfolded according to the sun's arc, not the demands of power or ambition. As you picture the hill, you may notice how open it feels. There are no grand structures pressing upward, no towers breaking the sky. Instead, there is space. Patches of green interrupted by simple paths. Occasional groves offering shade. The ground holds the warmth of the day and releases it slowly as evening approaches, encouraging stillness rather than activity. Below and beyond, Rome continues its life. Markets open and close. Soldiers pass along worn roads. Families gather and separate as they have always done. From this quieter height, those movements seem distant, almost ceremonial, like patterns repeating themselves without urgency. The hill does not compete with the city. It observes, detached and patient. People come here for practical reasons at first. Some tend small plots of land. Others pause during journeys, resting where the air feels lighter. There is no shared understanding yet of what this place will become. It does not announce a future. It offers only the present moment, uncomplicated and calm. Light plays an important role here. In the morning, it arrives gently, filtered by low mist rising from the river. Midday brings clarity without harshness, the sun resting comfortably above rather than bearing down. As evening approaches, shadows lengthen slowly, inviting quiet reflection rather than retreat. Even night settles softly, guided by stars rather than lamps. This landscape teaches patience without instruction. Nothing here needs to be hurried. The hill remains unchanged while generations pass through it, each leaving little more than footprints soon erased by time. That constancy creates a subtle sense of grounding, as if the land itself offers reassurance simply by remaining. If you listen closely, there is a particular kind of silence here, not the absence of sound, but a balance of it. Birds call without competition. Wind moves through leaves without interruption. Human voices, when they appear, blend rather than dominate. It is a place where the world seems to speak quietly to itself. Long before meaning is assigned, before memory becomes sacred, the hill exists as a witness. It absorbs seasons, weather, and human presence without changing its nature. This quiet endurance becomes its defining feature, though no one yet names it as such. As you rest within this scene, grounded by earth and air, it becomes clear that history does not always begin with an event. Sometimes it begins with a place, waiting calmly, offering nothing more than space and time. From such beginnings, the most enduring stories slowly emerge. From this quiet rise above the river, change begins not with announcement, but with presence. Rome continues to move as it always has, confident in its structures, rituals, and authority, yet beneath that confidence something subtle is taking shape. It does not interrupt the empire's rhythms. It moves within them, patient and largely unseen, carried by ordinary lives rather than public decree. At first, belief travels quietly, spoken in homes and remembered in small gatherings. There are no grand markers to announce it, no visible shift in the skyline or the streets below. People continue their work, their duties, their celebrations. The empire still governs, still builds, still commands. Yet alongside these familiar patterns, a different way of understanding the world is slowly being shared, one conversation at a time. This transformation does not hurry. It does not need to. Ideas take root here the way plants do on this hill, slowly, adapting to the soil and the seasons. One generation listens. Another remembers. A third begins to shape daily life around what was once only a quiet thought. The pace is so gradual that it is easy to miss while living through it. Rome has always been a city of gods, temples, and ceremonies. New beliefs are not unusual here. What is different now is not the presence of faith, but its character. It spreads without spectacle, without demand for attention. It asks for patience, for endurance, for trust in something beyond immediate reward. These qualities resonate quietly, especially among those accustomed to waiting rather than commanding. Imperial power remains visible and strong. Roads stretch outward. Laws are enforced. Authority speaks loudly where it must. But belief does not challenge this directly. It flows beneath it, like water beneath stone, shaping the ground over time without cracking it. This coexistence lasts longer than anyone expects, precisely because it does not insist on resolution. From the hill, centuries seem to pass as gently as days. Faces change. Languages soften. Customs adapt. What once felt new becomes familiar, and what was once unfamiliar becomes quietly assumed. Children grow into a world where belief is no longer whispered, yet still rarely shouted. It becomes part of daily understanding, woven into how people think about duty, suffering, hope, and community. The empire itself begins to change, though not abruptly. Structures endure, but meanings shift. Authority remains, but it is interpreted differently. Leadership is no longer only about command, but also about example. This shift is not declared. It is absorbed. It becomes part of how decisions are made and how lives are measured. What is remarkable is how little noise accompanies this transformation. There are no clear moments when one era ends and another begins. Instead, the change feels inevitable only in hindsight. While it is happening, it feels simply like time passing, one season giving way to the next. Belief proves resilient because it is carried by people who expect neither victory nor recognition. They continue their lives, guided by values that emphasize continuity over conquest. In doing so, they allow faith to grow at a pace that mirrors human endurance rather than human ambition. From the perspective of the hill, this slow unfolding feels natural. Just as the land remains while generations pass, belief remains while empires adapt. Neither rushes. Neither demands. Both persist. As Rome gradually changes, the city does not lose itself. Instead, it layers meaning upon meaning, creating depth rather than replacement. The past is not erased. It is absorbed, transformed, and carried forward quietly. This is how lasting change often happens. Not through disruption, but through patience. Not through force, but through time. And as you rest within this gentle passage of centuries, you may sense how inevitability can feel calming rather than dramatic, like a river finding its course without resistance. As belief settles more deeply into the life of the city, it begins to gather around memory rather than stone. Long before walls are raised or boundaries drawn, remembrance itself shapes the meaning of this hill. The ground does not change, but the way people return to it does. What was once simply a quiet rise near the river becomes a place recalled, spoken of softly, and approached with care. The memory that draws people here is not carried by monuments or inscriptions. It lives instead in shared understanding, passed carefully from one voice to another. It centers on Peter, remembered not first as a symbol, but as a presence, a life once lived, a witness whose story endures because it is told, not because it is displayed. In these early generations, memory remains fragile, protected not by stone, but by repetition and trust. Those who come do so without spectacle. There are no crowds pressing forward, no ceremonies announcing arrival. Pilgrims arrive quietly, often alone or in small groups, guided more by intention than direction. They stand, they pause, they remember. The act itself is simple, yet it carries weight because it connects them to something larger than their own moment in time. This way of honoring the past feels instinctive, deeply human. Long before history is written, people preserve meaning through return. They revisit places where memory feels close, where stories seem to rest just beneath the surface. The hill becomes such a place, not because it demands reverence, but because it receives it. As years pass, memory gathers strength. Each generation inherits not only the story, but the responsibility to carry it forward unchanged in spirit, even as the world around it shifts. The focus remains inward rather than outward. There is no urgency to declare importance. What matters is continuity, the assurance that something remembered today will still be remembered tomorrow. Pilgrimage, in this early sense, is less about distance traveled and more about intention held. The journey does not begin at the city's edge, but within the individual, guided by a desire to remain connected to a shared past. In this way, sacred ground is formed gradually, shaped by repeated presence rather than imposed meaning. The absence of monument becomes part of the experience. Without markers to direct attention, those who come must rely on reflection. They listen, they recall, they imagine. Memory fills the space that architecture will one day occupy. This creates a quieter form of authority, rooted not in visibility, but in trust. Over time, the site becomes known not for what stands upon it, but for what is believed to rest within it. The ground itself feels altered, not physically, but emotionally. It carries layers of remembrance, each adding depth without displacing what came before. The hill remains unchanged, yet it is no longer simply land. It has become a vessel for continuity. This transformation does not belong to a single moment. It unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly, as memory is reinforced through repetition. Each visit strengthens the association. Each telling steadies the tradition. What might have faded instead becomes more deeply rooted because it is tended carefully, without excess. In honoring memory this way, people affirm something enduring about themselves. They reveal a shared desire to preserve meaning even when certainty is impossible. The story of Peter becomes less about detail and more about presence, less about proof and more about connection. As you imagine this quiet devotion taking shape, you may sense how powerful such simplicity can be. Without proclamation or display, remembrance transforms the hill into sacred ground. Not through command, but through care. Not through monument, but through memory carried forward, patiently, from one generation to the next. As memory settles into routine, the need to gather takes on a quieter regularity. What was once an occasional return becomes a pattern, and patterns invite structure without forcing it. People begin to meet not only to remember, but to remain together in that remembrance. At first, nothing about these gatherings suggests permanence. They take place where space allows, adapting to circumstances rather than shaping them. Simple markers appear almost by accident. A lamp placed carefully. A table set aside. A symbol drawn and then erased. These gestures are not meant to last, yet they are repeated often enough to become familiar. Over time, familiarity creates expectation, and expectation gently encourages care. Spaces are cleaned before use. Objects are handled with intention. The ordinary begins to feel quietly set apart. As the years pass, these informal shrines begin to settle into particular locations. Not because they are commanded to do so, but because return feels easier when a place is known. The hill continues to offer its patient ground, and people respond by shaping small areas within it, respectful of what already exists. Nothing is rushed. Each addition is modest, almost hesitant, as if aware that meaning must be earned slowly. Stone enters the story not as a declaration, but as a practical choice. Wood weathers. Cloth fades. Stone endures. When it is used, it is chosen carefully, shaped by hands that understand time as something to be worked with, not against. Walls rise gradually, often replacing what stood before without altering its purpose. The change feels less like construction and more like settling in. Light becomes part of the architecture. Openings are placed where the sun can reach without overwhelming. Candlelight fills the spaces left in shadow, softening edges and encouraging stillness. Sound behaves differently now, contained and gentled by stone. Voices lower naturally. Movement slows. The environment itself begins to guide behavior. This process unfolds over generations, each contributing without seeking recognition. One builds, another repairs, another maintains. Craftsmanship becomes a form of devotion, measured not by speed, but by care. Details matter because they will be seen repeatedly, day after day, year after year. There is comfort in knowing that something made well will outlast its maker. What emerges is not grandeur, but continuity. These early structures do not dominate the landscape. They belong to it. Their presence feels earned, as though the land has agreed to hold them. The hill remains recognizable, yet subtly changed, now bearing signs of human intention that align with its quiet nature. As stone replaces simplicity, nothing essential is lost. The focus remains inward. The buildings do not exist to impress, but to shelter memory and practice. They create consistency, allowing rituals to unfold without disruption. In this way, structure supports belief rather than defining it. The rhythm established here is steady and reassuring. Gather, remember, maintain. Each cycle reinforces the last, creating a sense of reliability that mirrors the passing of seasons. This predictability brings calm. It allows people to rest within routine, trusting that what has been done before will be done again. From these patient beginnings, early Christian Rome takes shape not through proclamation, but through accumulation. Stone by stone, habit by habit, the sacred becomes visible without losing its quiet character. What stands now is not a monument to change, but a testament to patience, shaped gently by time and care. Within these spaces, time seems to soften. Hours are not measured sharply, but felt through repetition. The same steps are taken, the same words spoken, the same pauses observed. Nothing presses forward. Even growth happens without urgency, guided by need rather than ambition. When repairs are required, they are done thoughtfully, matching what already exists rather than replacing it entirely. As the community grows, the buildings adapt with it. Rooms expand slightly. Thresholds are reinforced. New stone is joined to old so carefully that the seam is barely noticed. This quiet blending reflects a larger pattern, where new generations add their presence without erasing what came before. Continuity becomes the highest value, protecting the past while allowing the present to breathe. These early structures also shape memory itself. Stories told within their walls gain steadiness, anchored by familiar surroundings. The physical space helps carry tradition forward, offering stability when words alone might drift. In this way, stone becomes a partner to remembrance, not replacing memory, but supporting it. Even when the wider city changes, these places remain composed. Outside, Rome adapts to shifting power and influence. Inside, the rhythm holds. This contrast deepens the sense of refuge. The buildings do not isolate themselves from the world, but they offer a pause within it, a place where time feels layered rather than linear. Over many years, what began as informal gathering becomes a recognizable presence, still modest, still restrained. The transformation feels natural, as though it could not have happened any other way. Nothing here suggests conquest or display. Instead, it reflects a shared understanding that endurance is built through care. As you imagine these stone walls standing quietly against the passing years, you may sense how patience leaves its mark. The structures do not demand attention. They simply remain, holding space for belief to continue unfolding at its own unhurried pace. In their stillness, they teach that lasting strength is often found not in scale, but in the calm repetition of careful human presence. Over time, as these quiet structures become part of daily life, something equally subtle begins to take shape within the community itself. Leadership does not arrive suddenly, nor is it claimed. It forms gradually, almost inevitably, shaped by habit, trust, and repetition. Those who are turned to most often are not the most forceful voices, but the most consistent presences. At first, guidance is informal. Certain individuals are sought out because they remember the traditions clearly, because they speak with steadiness, because they remain when others move on. Their authority is not announced. It is recognized. People listen to them not out of obligation, but out of familiarity. Over time, familiarity becomes reliance. As gatherings grow more regular, so does the need for continuity. Someone must ensure that rituals remain unchanged, that teachings are carried forward accurately, that disputes are settled gently before they spread. These responsibilities are accepted quietly, often without ceremony. Leadership here feels less like elevation and more like service, taken on because someone must hold the line between past and present. The role of bishop emerges in this way, rooted in care rather than command. A bishop becomes a point of steadiness, a living link between generations. Their task is not to rule, but to remember, to preserve, to guide without pressing. They are trusted because they have proven patient, because they have shown restraint, because they understand that authority grows strongest when it is rarely asserted. Over time, certain communities look beyond themselves, seeking connection with others. Communication spreads slowly, carried by letters, travelers, shared practices. What develops is not a hierarchy imposed from above, but a network shaped by mutual recognition. Communities acknowledge one another, and within that acknowledgement, certain centers of guidance naturally form. Rome, with its depth of memory and its growing stability, becomes one such center. Not because it demands that role, but because others begin to look toward it. The presence of long-standing tradition, combined with steady leadership, creates a sense of reliability. Guidance offered from here feels anchored, less likely to shift with passing pressures. The figure who will later be called Pope emerges from this same process. At first, the role is indistinct, more responsibility than title. It grows through expectation rather than decree. When questions arise, answers are sought here. When uncertainty spreads, reassurance is offered calmly. Over time, this repeated turning creates a focal point, not of power, but of trust. What is striking is how little changes on the surface. Life continues much as before. Buildings stand quietly. Rituals repeat. Yet beneath that calm, leadership is solidifying, shaped by countless small interactions. Each decision made carefully. Each response measured. Authority accumulates not through force, but through reliability. This form of leadership carries weight precisely because it avoids spectacle. It does not compete with imperial structures. It does not seek to replace them directly. Instead, it occupies a different space, one concerned with meaning rather than command. In doing so, it becomes resilient. While political power shifts and reforms, this quieter authority remains, anchored in continuity. Responsibility becomes the defining characteristic. Those in leadership positions understand that their role is to hold steady rather than to expand. They are custodians rather than architects, tasked with protecting what exists rather than reshaping it. This restraint earns trust over time, reinforcing the cycle through which leadership continues to grow. Cause and effect unfold gently here. Stability encourages trust. Trust invites guidance. Guidance strengthens structure. Structure supports community. Each step follows naturally from the last, without rupture or urgency. The process feels organic, as though it could not have unfolded differently. As generations pass, titles become clearer, roles more defined. Yet the underlying tone remains unchanged. Leadership is still framed as service, authority as responsibility. Those who hold it are expected to listen before they speak, to preserve before they alter. This expectation becomes part of the culture itself, shaping how leadership is perceived and practiced. From within this calm evolution, a lasting form of influence takes shape. It does not rely on command or conquest. It rests instead on memory, trust, and a steady willingness to remain present. As you follow this progression, you may sense how leadership formed this way feels less disruptive, more reassuring, like a hand placed gently where guidance is needed. In this environment, authority feels less like control and more like continuity. It provides orientation without pressure, direction without force. And because it grows slowly, it settles deeply, becoming part of the fabric of daily life rather than something imposed upon it. As the story continues, this quiet leadership will carry the community forward through changing times. It will adapt without losing its center, guiding not through dominance, but through steadiness. For now, it is enough to observe how something so influential can arise so softly, shaped by patience, responsibility, and the enduring power of trust. As this steady form of leadership becomes familiar, its responsibilities begin to extend gently outward. What was once focused primarily on guidance and continuity now encounters practical realities that cannot be ignored. Communities grow. Property is tended. Resources are shared. Questions arise not only about belief, but about order, care, and responsibility across wider spaces. The shift is gradual, shaped by necessity rather than ambition. Land comes under stewardship almost unintentionally. Gifts are offered, often in gratitude or trust, and accepted with care. These holdings are not treated as trophies, but as obligations. They must be managed, protected, and maintained for the sake of those who depend upon them. Administration grows from this need, taking form quietly, shaped by precedent and patience. The development of governance here does not resemble conquest. There are no sweeping declarations or dramatic expansions. Instead, boundaries are clarified slowly, defined through agreement rather than force. Authority settles where responsibility already exists, formalizing what has long been practiced informally. Power, in this sense, is acknowledged rather than seized. Diplomacy becomes an essential skill. Relationships must be maintained with neighboring powers, each with their own priorities and expectations. Communication is measured, deliberate, and restrained. Words are chosen carefully, knowing that stability depends more on understanding than assertion. This careful negotiation becomes one of the defining features of this emerging political presence. Administration follows a similar pattern. Records are kept with precision. Decisions are documented, not to display control, but to ensure continuity. Systems develop slowly, shaped by experience rather than theory. Each adjustment builds upon what came before, refining rather than replacing. Complexity is managed through patience, allowing clarity to emerge over time. Those who serve within these structures understand that their authority is conditional. It exists to support stability, not to disrupt it. This awareness tempers decision-making, encouraging caution over speed. The emphasis remains on maintaining balance, ensuring that change, when necessary, unfolds without shock. The people governed by these arrangements often experience little sense of upheaval. Life continues with familiar rhythms. Markets open. Fields are tended. Disputes are resolved with attention to precedent rather than punishment. Governance feels present but unobtrusive, guiding rather than directing. This approach fosters trust. When power is exercised rarely and predictably, it becomes less threatening. Communities come to rely on these structures precisely because they do not intrude unnecessarily. Authority gains strength through restraint, demonstrating that stability can be achieved without force. Over time, these territories come to be recognized collectively, not as an empire driven by expansion, but as a network sustained by administration and diplomacy. The emphasis remains inward, focused on preservation rather than growth. Influence extends because it is dependable, not because it is imposed. Even as external pressures arise, the response remains measured. Agreements are sought. Compromises are made. The goal is continuity, not dominance. This consistent approach reinforces the identity of these lands as places governed by principle rather than ambition. As years pass into centuries, this quiet power becomes institutional. Roles are defined. Processes refined. Yet the underlying philosophy remains unchanged. Governance is understood as stewardship, authority as responsibility. The system endures because it adapts without losing its core. For those observing from within, the experience is one of calm reliability. Power exists, but it does not announce itself loudly. It operates through routine, through predictable processes that allow daily life to proceed undisturbed. This predictability becomes its greatest strength. In this way, a unique form of political presence takes shape. It is neither fleeting nor aggressive. It is patient, administrative, and restrained. It governs not by overwhelming force, but by steady presence, offering a model of power that feels less like control and more like care. Time within the Vatican no longer moves as a straight line. After authority has quietly settled into place and governance has learned to act without haste, the city itself begins to breathe in cycles. Each day resembles the last, not from stagnation, but from intention. The repetition becomes reassuring, a steady rhythm that guides thought toward calm. Morning arrives softly. Bells do not command attention, they invite it. Their tones drift across courtyards and stone corridors, marking hours that have been marked the same way for centuries. People rise not with urgency, but with expectation. They know what the day will bring, and that knowledge removes tension before it can form. Prayer begins as it always has. Words spoken countless times lose their sharp edges and become smooth with use. Voices remain low, measured, and unhurried. Even silence becomes structured, arriving at familiar moments and lasting just long enough to feel complete. Nothing feels abrupt. Everything has its place. Work follows ritual, just as it has for generations. Scholars sit at desks where light falls predictably through high windows. Scribes and archivists handle documents with slow care, respecting both fragility and history. Each page turned is an echo of previous hands doing the same task, reinforcing continuity rather than change. Meals occur at expected hours. Food is simple, taken without excess conversation. Eating becomes another rhythm, another quiet marker of time passing. Afterwards, movement resumes, unforced and orderly. Hallways see the same paths traced again and again, footsteps soft against stone floors worn smooth by repetition. Outside, the seasons shift, but even change here feels familiar. Spring returns with gentle certainty. Summer light lingers longer in courtyards. Autumn cools the air, and winter brings silence that feels protective rather than empty. Each season has arrived before, and each will arrive again. Within these walls, the passage of time is softened by familiarity. Each corridor carries echoes of countless similar days, and that sameness brings peace rather than fatigue. When tasks are repeated, they no longer demand effortful attention. Hands move almost on their own, guided by memory, allowing the mind to remain unburdened. Prayers return at set hours, spoken in tones that have changed little over centuries. The words are known well enough that they no longer require concentration. Instead, they settle gently, becoming part of the background of thought. This predictability transforms ritual into rest, offering stability in a world that rarely stands still. Between these moments, there is waiting, but it is unhurried waiting. Time is not filled for the sake of productivity. It is allowed to exist. People pause near windows, observing light shift across stone. Others walk slowly through courtyards, their steps measured, unpressed by destination. The work of preservation continues steadily. Documents are reviewed, repaired, and returned to their places. Nothing is rushed. Accuracy matters more than completion. This careful pace ensures that what is kept remains trustworthy, reinforcing confidence in the continuity of record and memory. Even governance follows this rhythm. Decisions are made within established frameworks, guided by precedent and consultation. There is comfort in knowing that outcomes are shaped by process rather than impulse. Stability grows from this consistency, creating a sense of safety for those within and beyond the walls. As evening approaches, the city settles again. The light fades slowly, replaced by lamplight that softens edges and quiets movement. Sounds diminish. Activity narrows to what is essential. The same bells that guided the morning now signal rest, completing the cycle. Night brings its own routine. Watch is kept. Silence deepens. The city does not sleep entirely, but it rests attentively, maintaining presence without disturbance. This watchfulness is calm, practiced, and unobtrusive. Over years and centuries, these patterns accumulate, creating a texture of time that feels thick yet gentle. Each repetition reinforces the last, weaving a continuous thread that connects past and present seamlessly. For those who experience this life, the absence of novelty becomes a gift. Without constant change, attention can soften. The mind no longer scans for what is next. It settles into what is. This is how the city sustains itself. Not through spectacle or urgency, but through rhythm. Routine becomes a quiet teacher, demonstrating that endurance is built through consistency, and that peace often arises not from escape, but from familiarity embraced fully. As you rest within this imagined cycle, you may feel how repetition can calm rather than constrain, how predictability can free the mind from tension. Time here does not press forward. It circles gently, carrying each day into the next, offering a steady, reassuring flow that continues without interruption. Within that flow, rest arrives naturally. Breathing slows as thoughts drift, unchallenged. The city remains, steady and unchanged, holding its quiet vigil. Nothing demands response. Nothing interrupts. The rhythm continues, patient and unbroken, allowing awareness to soften completely, until wakefulness fades gently, and the mind follows the same trusted path into calm, restorative sleep. This calm endures, repeating tomorrow, and the next day, unchanged, reliable, peaceful, like a lullaby carried forward by time itself. Always steady, always gently returning. As the rhythm of bells, prayers, and seasons continues its unhurried cycle, another quiet presence reveals itself within the walls of Vatican City. It does not speak loudly. It does not interrupt the routines you have already settled into. Instead, it waits patiently, layered into corridors, pages, and stone. This presence is memory, carefully kept, gently protected, and passed forward without urgency. Here, art is not decoration. It is remembrance made visible. Imagine yourself walking slowly through long hallways where footsteps soften instinctively. The light is filtered, never harsh. Walls carry color not meant to excite, but to endure. Frescoes do not demand attention, they invite contemplation. They are there whether or not you stop to look, content in their quiet service. In this place, creativity is not rushed. Painters, sculptors, and builders worked not for applause, but for continuity. Many names have faded. Their work remains. This, too, is part of the calm, an understanding that lasting things do not require constant recognition. Art here learned to speak softly. Paint was mixed slowly. Stone was shaped patiently. Gold leaf was applied not to dazzle, but to honor what words could not hold. Even the most elaborate images were designed for stillness, for candlelight, for long pauses, for eyes that might return again and again over a lifetime. Above all, these works were made to remember. Stories that once passed only by voice found a second life in image. Scenes repeated themselves across walls and ceilings so that memory would not rely on urgency or fear of forgetting. You did not need to memorize. You only needed to return. Time moved differently in these spaces. In rooms set aside for study, scribes bent over desks as daylight shifted gradually across the floor. The work was quiet, repetitive, and deeply human. Letter after letter, line after line, texts were copied, not to innovate, but to preserve. The act itself became a form of devotion. There was no hurry. A single page could take days. A book, months. A collection, generations. Within the halls of the Vatican Apostolic Library, this patience became an institution. Shelves did not exist to impress, but to protect. Manuscripts were gathered from distant places, not as trophies, but as responsibilities. Languages rested side by side. Ideas slept peacefully, waiting for the right moment to be read again. The library grew quietly, like a tree whose roots deepen far more than its branches spread. Caretakers came and went. The memory stayed. Nearby, images reached upward, not outward. In the Sistine Chapel, color and form unfold across a ceiling designed not for motion, but for stillness. You are not meant to rush beneath it. You are meant to lie back, metaphorically or literally, and let time loosen its grip. Even here, silence remains in control. The figures overhead are not frozen in drama. They exist in a suspended moment, forever between movement and rest. They remind the viewer that creation itself can be both powerful and calm. That meaning does not need noise to endure. What matters is not the artist's fame, but the continuity of care that followed. Generation after generation ensured that cracks were filled, pigments protected, light controlled. Preservation became a language of respect. To maintain was to participate. Beyond painted walls and written pages, architecture itself became memory shaped into stone. Buildings were designed not simply to stand, but to last, to absorb footsteps, whispers, and centuries without complaint. Within St. Peter's Basilica, scale does not overwhelm so much as it steadies. The space expands your breath. It encourages stillness. Here, memory is not hidden away. It is lived with. Altars, columns, and domes hold the weight of repetition. The same prayers spoken in the same places. The same light arriving at the same hour. Stone remembers these things. It responds by remaining. Throughout Vatican history, preservation was never a single project. It was a mindset. To save something was not to trap it in the past, but to keep it available, to allow future generations the same quiet access to thought, belief, and beauty. Nothing here rushes toward the present. Even decisions about what to keep were made slowly. Not everything survived. But what did was chosen with care, guided by the belief that memory, once lost, cannot be recreated in the same way. This understanding shaped an environment where restraint became a virtue. Less noise. More listening. Art and records were not meant to dictate thought. They were meant to hold space, for reflection, for interpretation, for return. In this way, the Vatican became not only a place of authority, but a place of guardianship. And guardians work best in silence. As centuries passed, styles changed. Techniques evolved. But the underlying rhythm remained constant. Each generation added its layer without erasing the ones beneath. Paint rested atop older paint. Stone joined older stone. New shelves stood beside ancient ones. Time became layered rather than linear. This layering creates a sense of depth that does not stimulate, but settles the mind. You are not required to understand everything at once. You are allowed to drift, knowing that meaning does not disappear when unattended. It waits. As you imagine these halls and chambers, allow yourself to feel the reassurance embedded within them. So much has been remembered here. So much has been kept safe without urgency. And just as these memories were preserved through patience and care, you too are allowed to rest without fear of losing anything important. The world does not require your vigilance right now. The records will remain. The art will endure. And you can let your thoughts grow quiet, trusting that what matters most has already been gently held. As memory settles gently into art and silence, another quiet realization begins to form, almost without announcement. All that has been preserved, protected, and patiently carried forward did not remain only an inward-looking tradition. Over time, it learned how to speak softly beyond its walls. Not loudly. Not forcefully. But clearly. What you are resting within now eventually became something both very small and quietly vast: Vatican City, a state measured not by territory, but by continuity. Its boundaries are modest. You could walk them without strain. From one edge to another, the distance is brief enough to be crossed in minutes. And yet, for centuries, words spoken from this place have traveled farther than armies ever could. This contrast is not accidental. It is intentional. Vatican City did not emerge from conquest or expansion. It emerged from definition, from the careful drawing of lines meant to limit power rather than extend it. After long centuries in which spiritual leadership and temporal responsibility were deeply intertwined, there came a moment when clarity became necessary. Not urgency. Clarity. The world beyond the walls was changing. Nations were becoming modern. Borders were being fixed. Authority was being questioned and reorganized. In this shifting landscape, the Church did something characteristically restrained: it chose to become smaller. By formally recognizing a tiny, independent state, the Church separated its spiritual voice from territorial ambition. The land was reduced so that meaning could remain focused. Sovereignty was claimed not to dominate, but to protect independence of conscience and continuity of tradition. Here, size became a form of discipline. Within this small state, leadership no longer needed to manage vast lands or competing regions. Instead, attention turned inward, to diplomacy, to dialogue, to presence rather than control. The Vatican became a place that could speak to many without belonging to any one nation. This is where influence took on its quietest form. Rather than issuing commands, the Vatican learned to offer perspective. Rather than enforcing outcomes, it emphasized principles. Its representatives traveled not as governors, but as listeners. Conversations replaced campaigns. Statements replaced shows of force. The center of this influence is not the city-state itself, but the Holy See, an entity that speaks not for territory, but for a tradition spanning centuries. While Vatican City provides physical independence, the Holy See carries moral and diplomatic presence across the world. The distinction is subtle, but deeply important. One is a place. The other is a voice. Because of this structure, the Vatican participates in global conversations without needing to compete for resources or power. It maintains diplomatic relationships with nations large and small, not to negotiate advantage, but to remain present wherever dialogue is possible. This presence is calm by design. Ambassadors arrive not to bargain for land or trade, but to maintain channels of understanding. The Vatican listens more than it speaks. And when it does speak, it does so slowly, choosing language meant to endure rather than persuade quickly. Influence here is measured in decades. You can sense this patience in how decisions are made. Statements are drafted carefully. Words are weighed. Silence is often chosen when noise would be easier. This restraint is not hesitation, it is continuity in action. The Vatican does not rush because it does not need to. Its authority does not depend on trends or immediacy. It rests on consistency. On showing up again and again, unchanged in its core, even as the world around it transforms. From within the smallest state on earth, messages have traveled across continents, messages about dignity, responsibility, peace, and care. Not demands. Invitations. And because they are invitations, they can be accepted or ignored without consequence. This freedom is essential to their power. Nothing here is enforced. Everything is offered. As you imagine this, allow yourself to notice how different this model feels from the louder forces you may be accustomed to. No urgency presses in. No alarm sounds. Influence unfolds slowly, like memory preserved in stone or ink. Even modern relevance is approached gently. The Vatican does not attempt to be current by chasing novelty. Instead, it remains rooted, trusting that steadiness itself is a form of relevance. When it addresses contemporary concerns, it does so by drawing from long memory, connecting present questions to enduring values. This creates a sense of depth rather than reaction. Within its walls, time still moves differently. Bells still mark hours. Archives still wait patiently. Rituals continue without concern for speed. And yet, from this quiet rhythm, the Vatican remains engaged with a world that rarely slows down. It offers a counterweight. A reminder that not all influence must be visible. That not all authority must announce itself. That some forms of leadership work best when they lower their voice rather than raise it. As you rest with this thought, notice how naturally it fits with everything that came before. Memory preserved through art. Silence honored through routine. Leadership shaped by patience. Power defined by restraint. The smallest state does not compete with the world. It converses with it. And you, having traveled gently through this long history, are not required to hold on to every detail. Like the caretakers of memory themselves, you can trust that what matters has been kept safe. The walls will remain. The voice will continue. And you can allow yourself to drift further into rest, knowing that even great influence can exist without disturbance, quiet, steady, and enduring. As the idea of quiet influence settles, night arrives without ceremony. The city grows smaller again, not in size, but in sound, and the day loosens its grip. Within these walls, evening is not an ending. It is a return. Lights soften along stone corridors, tracing paths worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Guards stand without spectacle, present more as continuity than control. Their stillness belongs to the place, as if they are part of the architecture rather than separate from it. Somewhere, a door closes gently, and the echo fades before it finishes forming. You move through this quiet without being seen, guided only by calm attention. The air carries the day's warmth away, replacing it with a cool steadiness that encourages unhurried breath. Courtyards rest under open sky. Shadows gather in familiar shapes, never threatening, only deepening the sense of enclosure and safety. Time behaves differently now. Without schedules pressing forward, minutes stretch and soften. The clocks remain, but their authority weakens. What matters is presence. What matters is that the same paths have been walked at this hour for generations, each night folding into the next with patient care. From a distance, the great dome holds a pale glow, not bright, not dim, but steady enough to feel reassuring. It does not demand attention. It simply remains, as it has through countless nights like this one. Beneath it, the vast interior rests, emptied of voices yet full of memory. Inside these walls, night is not absence. It is a pause that allows meaning to settle. Archives sleep behind doors designed to protect rather than conceal. Pages lie still, knowing they will be read again. Art waits without impatience, unconcerned with applause, content to endure. As you continue, footsteps are imagined rather than heard. The past walks beside the present without interruption. A scholar crossing a courtyard centuries ago feels no farther away than the guard at the gate tonight. Their purposes differ, but their calm is shared. Both belong to a rhythm that does not rush. There is comfort in this repetition. Each night arrives. Each night passes. Nothing essential is lost in the dark. Instead, the darkness preserves, wrapping the city in a quiet agreement to continue as it always has, attentive and restrained. Even the world beyond the walls seems distant now. Its noise cannot cross this threshold easily. What reaches here arrives softened, filtered through stone, ritual, and time. This is not isolation. It is intentional stillness, chosen again and again as a way of remaining clear. You may notice how easily thought slows in this environment. Questions release their urgency. Answers are no longer required. The city does not ask you to understand it fully, only to share its pace for a moment. In doing so, you participate in the same quiet exchange that has unfolded night after night. Windows glow briefly, then dim. Corridors settle. The watch continues, not because danger is expected, but because care is a form of respect. Every detail, from the closing of gates to the keeping of light, follows habits refined over centuries. This is how timelessness feels when it is lived rather than declared. Not dramatic. Not frozen. Simply present, steady enough to hold both memory and rest without effort. As night deepens, the city does not disappear. It becomes more itself. And you, having walked its silence, can allow that steadiness to carry you gently onward, knowing that here, even in darkness, continuity keeps watch. Beyond the gates, streets remain quiet, as if the surrounding city senses this different tempo and adjusts in response. Night here teaches patience. It suggests that endurance is built not from constant motion, but from careful return, from choosing again what deserves attention. You may imagine the lamps being checked once more, the keys resting in familiar places, the routines closing their gentle circle. Nothing is hurried, because nothing is threatened. The city trusts its own rhythm. It has learned that survival does not require noise, only consistency. In this hour, history does not announce itself. It breathes. It settles alongside you, neither heavy nor distant. The same calm that steadied builders, scholars, and caretakers now steadies you. There is no expectation to remember every name or date. The presence is enough. Eventually, even thought thins, like mist lifting from stone. What remains is a sense of being held within something older and quieter than urgency. The night continues its watch, and you are free to rest within it, carried by the same unbroken line of care that has passed from one generation to the next. Sleep comes naturally in such company. The city does not fade when eyes close, it remains, steady and attentive, doing what it has always done. Somewhere a light stays on, somewhere a bell waits for morning. Nothing asks you to stay awake. Nothing urges you forward. You are permitted to let go, knowing that this place will continue, unchanged in its quiet purpose, long after this night gently passes. Rest here a little longer. Let the silence complete its circle around you, unbroken and kind. The smallest state keeps its watch without effort, without demand, proving once more that presence, when patient, is enough. You can trust this steadiness now, and allow sleep to arrive, knowing nothing important is being missed. The night holds, quietly, as it always has. Tonight too. The night has done what it needed to do. It has held the city in stillness long enough for its deeper rhythm to be felt, and now, without asking for attention, it begins to loosen its hold. Nothing signals departure. There is no closing sound, no final gesture. Leaving happens the same way arrival did, gently. You find yourself moving once more toward the edges of the walls, not pushed, not rushed, simply guided by the quiet sense that it is time to carry this calm elsewhere. The stones remain where they are. The corridors do not follow. They do not need to. What they offered was never meant to be kept, only experienced. Behind you, the city continues exactly as it always has. Watch shifts will change. Lights will be checked again. Morning will arrive at its appointed hour, whether or not anyone is waiting for it. History here does not pause when you leave. It does not depend on witnesses. It flows forward with the same unbroken patience that brought it to this moment. This is the reassurance the place leaves with you. Nothing ends because you step away. Nothing fades because attention moves on. The past does not close its doors at night, and it does not vanish at dawn. It remains, steady and undisturbed, ready to be returned to whenever the world feels too loud. As you pass beyond the gates, the quiet does not disappear. It travels with you, not as an image, but as a feeling, a slower breath, a softened sense of time, a reminder that continuity exists even when you are not watching it. The city has always trusted this exchange. It gives calm freely, knowing it will return again in other ways. History, seen this way, is no longer a weight or a lesson. It becomes a companion. Something that walks beside the present without demanding explanation. You do not have to remember dates or names to carry it forward. You only have to allow its pace to influence your own. The world beyond the walls resumes its motion, but it does not need to be faced all at once. There is no requirement to hurry back into noise. What you have touched here is not fragile. It will not be lost by rest. If anything, it becomes clearer when the mind grows quiet. You may notice that even now, with the city behind you, the sense of being held has not entirely faded. That is because the story was never confined to a place. It was always about how time can be treated with care, how leadership can exist without force, how meaning can endure without urgency. Nothing here asked you to stay awake. Nothing asked you to be impressed. The history you have walked through offered itself in the same way it has for centuries, patiently, without insistence, confident that what matters will settle where it needs to. Now, you are free to rest. The city will continue its watch. The night will pass into morning. The bells will ring when they always have. And you do not need to follow any of it. You can let the story remain where it belongs, knowing it is not finished, only ongoing, unfolding quietly beyond the edges of attention. As you drift further from the walls, allow the calm to remain. Let the sense of continuity ease you into stillness. Nothing important is being left behind. Everything essential has already been given. You can sleep now, assured that history, when treated gently, does not disturb rest. It supports it. Thank you for spending this quiet time here. More stories are waiting whenever you return.